We finally got to the Flying Dutchman. The boys found it today after about just half a day's search. This is a pretty momentous occasion. It's the first time this has been visited, I think, by anyone, either nationals or outsiders, since 1988 when the DPAA and Bruce Hoy were here. The Flying Dutchman is quite a tragic story. With 23 souls on board coming from Port Moresby across to Pongani. 6 didn't survive. So in the morning, the 17, a further died shortly after. And of those, only 6 ever managed to tell the story about how they were coming from Port Moresby. They hit a sudden downdraft. The pilot tried to recover. They clipped some trees and then ploughed into the hillside. The front part of the plane, the cockpit, has gone right into the ground, and the cockpit and just behind that there was a big fire from the reserve fuel drums that were stored there. And that they all had to exit the plane for the fire and wait until the fire went out before they were able to go back in.
Peter, so congratulations. As you say, you've found the wreck of the Flying Dutchman, and you're the first person to visit it since 1988. Tell us a bit more about when you found it and whereabouts is it?
Well, I was able to help some of the local people go up the range up towards Mount O'Brien. And so we were up there at around about 2,800 metres above sea level, quite cold and wet. And we'd walked from, I'd flown into Dorabri Sorrow and then walked to the last village before the Owen Stanley Range called Loronu. And from Loronu there was a party of 26 decided to come from the village and surrounding area with just myself and another Australian. And I was able to show them the rough area that we needed to search for the Flying Dutchman. So after 2 days of walking, we got to that search area. The first day we were there, we were totally rained out. It was cold and it was wet and really not suitable for doing any search at all. And on the second day that we were there, after a few hours of searching in the area that I had identified, a couple within the group managed to find parts of the Flying Dutchman that had come off and then traced those to locate the Flying Dutchman itself and the wreck, which is on the side of Mount O'Brien, very close to Mount O'Brien.
Which is that in Central or Northern Province?
It's right on the border. It's within metres of the border. It's right on the border between Central and Oro.
Ini play lau dawari ke dalam kilo ala makawan orang sekolah ini. Wah bebe, serius doni school mana hospital. Ini mana kau dia beri dua. Nama satu ini siapa orang dia. Ini tora doro mita ada semoni ma do mi eskus mau mino belas. Bono ita tole si ita la kau kora ma ita tahu. Kamu lagi? Yo. Ya anu atas dori ter mau itu ya karera. Ita si boleh ter mau itu ita karera. Dia lau hadis pengen ada wine ni. Tunggu. Ah, Peter ya मैं प्लेट या तो ही नहीं, लाउडी बरस, ये गाड़ी में बारे ना गाड़ी या किसी ने जा रहा है, एरी जा रहा है, ओमा किरी आएगा आपने, एरी जा
Morning, everyone. Morning. Thank you for wishing us well. Thank you for your prayers, taking us up the mountain. Thank you for your welcome here, and also for wishing us luck. Okay. We're very lucky to be able to help you go up there. Try to find this. We may not find it, but at least we'll know where it isn't. Okay, so it's a big occasion, and so we'll raise the Australian flag. Maybe it should be the US flag, it was the US soldiers. Yes. But we've got an Australian flag, so that can go up while we're up in the mountain. When the flag's down, you know we're back. Okay? I'm up from Lorono, the advance team, and in the background there you can see in the centre of the screen now is Mount O'Brien. We're going to go up pretty close to the top of that, but off to the left a little bit. See the rest of the grassland up here. It's where the US used to drop biscuit bombs, planes, to supply the troops coming through. Just scanning round now, just past the east, going round more to the north, and you can see that the clouds actually starting to move in on the high mountains here. So when we get up to that elevation, we'll be in the clouds. So we've climbed up from the village down there that you can just see in the picture now. Lorono, we just come up from there. It's about a 450, 500 metre climb. Very steep, not much zigzagging. And that's the valley down there. Mimai River runs out into the Kemp Welch River. finished the walk up from Loronu through a few of the camps, quite a steep climb section. The last section's been relatively flat, and we've come into Camp Arakaria, where the local boys from Loronu have really set the camp up beautifully. This was all set up for the trip that we had to end up cancelling, but they have done such a great job here, ready for the tarpaulins, sleeping above the ground. Right, tables made up, ready,
Jungle table, yes.
and they've done absolutely everything that I had asked for and more, and even stacked firewood to keep dry. That's a beautiful camp setup that they've got here for us, and very welcoming. Well done to all those guys. Here we are at Camp Arakaria. They're the hunting dogs that have come up with the different groups. It's turned into a real social event with families joining in. You're going to be famous, Wari.
Yes.
You're on a video. Konami.
Thank you.
Ben on.
Thank you. Fred.
And down here we have the Mimai team, do we?
Yes. Right.
This is a Mimai team?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what a great campsite. Grassland. Passed over at 2,675 metres was the highest part in the valley, and we're now just having a break before the boys set up a camp. This is going to be our site for where we go out to search from here, right? And so just taking a break here, and that's the team. Say hello.
Hello.
And then somewhere up there is where we're going to go. Go up there tomorrow on a trail that's been cut, hopefully to find the helipad that was used in 1988, and that will guide us to where the Flying Dutchman is. So this is the first search area. Don't know if we're going to be successful, but it's based on Bruce Hoy's description and also the description of Ed Holloman, the leader of one team that survived. And out that way and down that direction is I think, the direction that Absalom, the Kiap and patrol officer, came in 1961. He came up here, he walked up here pretty much to this place, and he waited for the local boys to come back and within about half an hour or so they came back with pieces that were identified as part of the Flying Dutchman, and then they went in the next day, and that was the first time it had been found since bodies had been recovered around 1957, and will be the first person to visit this site since 1988, when the US Army DPAA and Bruce Hoy visited the site. The creek is a water supply up in the grasslands, drains out of all the moss, which is feet deep. That's a great little water supply for the camp. The ladies have been carrying very heavy loads, you can see in the dilly bags. Welcome everybody. Just off the edge of the grassland is where camp has been set up. You can see it's pretty heavy going. There's a track in here, and we have Richie here writing his memoirs. And they set up this whole camp this afternoon in a couple of hours. Cooking started. So that's where all guys are sleeping. Pots on the boil.
Got your coffee there, mate?
Oh, thank you. And then swing around here. This is our palatial accommodation. Tents under a tarp.
Nice one. Thank you.
Cheese!
Siti mo matang
Who's got the wallaby?
Yeah.
Quite a bit of rain last night. It was probably a lot of it dripping out of the trees. So waking up this morning to a very refreshing day. We're really sitting in the clouds here at the present time, so I expect it's pretty humid. Not as cold as I expected it to be. And there we have breakfast being prepared. A few extra tarps went up last night. Out in the grasslands and in the clouds. We'll probably try and wait until this lifts a little bit before heading out on our first day of searching for the plane. This is the top of the grassland, and if we're in the correct place, this is where Jack Absalom came in 1961, and he sent the boys out after breakfast from a camp further back down in the grassland, and he walked up here, and about an hour later his boys walked out with parts from Flying Dutchman. And if the information I've been given is correct, the Flying Dutchman is somewhere up just below that ridge line in front of us there now. So we need to travel up along that ridge line and have a look initially for a helipad that was put in 1988 when the DPAA visited the site. If we can find the helipad, then we have a good chance of finding the Flying Dutchman just a bit below it. Just try and take a bit of video here as I'm walking along, give you a bit of an idea of what it's like. You really have to watch your step, otherwise you fall in the creek the way I just did. Standard uniform of the day is Bunnings ponchos. I could get a sponsorship out of Bunnings for the next trip and they can fly us in by helicopter. This is coming further up that grassland filmed before. Coming closer to where we'll go off to the right. Up on the ridge line. Been a bit difficult to film because I'm still quite wet. And sometimes I need both hands just to keep steady. When you look at this little creek here, this seems to be the creek that the first party followed out once they hit the water. And you can see why you would follow this. It's a lovely creek. It's running north. Right. Compared to the jungle, it's pretty easy to navigate along here. We're up on the kidney-shaped knoll, not far from the top of it now. It's around 2,725 metres. There is a trail across the top of this. Half of the boys have gone in the other direction towards Mount O'Brien, thinking they think it might be actually over that direction. And if they find something, they'll come back this route that heads back to the camp on the grassland. We just need to keep our eye out on the left-hand side. As much as you can for a helipad, and then below that the Flying Dutchman. So we're definitely in the area as described by Bruce Hoy. So we'll just keep trying.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
on the wing here. There's the engine. Jungle has really taken over. So somewhere out here is the cockpit. And we'll just leave that alone because the pilot remains have never been recovered. Talk about it, or worry about it, or think about going up into the cold mountains. Now you know where it is. So now you can plan other things. And maybe take people up there. Right, take tourists up there. Show them your hospitality here. And show them as you will what beautiful people you are. And show them what is special up in these mountains on the way. And show them the Flying Dutchman that has a very tragic but interesting story associated with that. And I'll tell that story later tonight. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you, Richie, for being my companion all the way. Wow! And thank you to all of the team that went up there, even the children.
Yes.
Right, and the ladies.
Yeah.
Yep. It was a great team. It was very good. It worked. We found it. Richie, come on, Richie!
Welcome of the Flying Dutchman here. It's lovely welcome in Larun community, Larun village. Carry out the reeds and then Peter. They are there. Peter is on the flag. Reeds on the flag.
Richie and I are glad we came here to help you. We didn't find it. We didn't find it. You found it.
You deserve all the reward. You guys did all the work. You guys did all the work. You guys deserve all the reward to come your way now. That plane hasn't been seen for a long time. Peter had never seen it. You guys found it. Made him so happy too.
What does this mean to you personally? I mean, I know that you've been taking a long time interest in the Flying Dutchman, and you made it one of your life's passions to find the wreckage.
Well, it is very special to be able to see it after spending so much time researching and understanding the full story behind the Flying Dutchman and all the events leading up to it and all of the times that people have visited it in the years since. And it hasn't been visited for 36 years. And no one has the exact position of it. So there was a lot that, but prior to that, my motivation was to find something that was going to be attractive to take philanthropists or trekkers in who would help contribute to the economy, but also help contribute specifically to the health and education of communities along the Kappa Kappa Trail or the Ghost Mountain Trail. And that was the driving motivation, and the motivation that both James Campbell, who wrote the first ever book on the troops who marched the Kappa Kappa Trail, and I decided the best way to try to help the communities was to focus on the health and education. But to get sponsorship, we had to have something attractive. And I had heard about the Flying Dutchman being up near Mount O'Brien somewhere, and the locals had told me about that. And so we made that one of the things that would attract those people, the right sort of people, and therefore attract the money. We were planning to do that in 2020. Unfortunately, all those plans were cancelled due to COVID. However, because we're going to take people there, I decided I'd better actually find it and locate it. And so I attempted to do that in 2020. And unfortunately, all the information I had at that time and the information that the locals had was not correct, was not accurate. And my attempt to find it at that time was failed. We didn't manage to find it, but we did manage at least to eliminate some places where it wasn't.
So, how is it like getting into that particular area where the wreck is?
It is tough and beautiful. The walk up the range from Loronu, you need to climb in elevation about 2,000 metres, right? And we did that in 2 days to get there. And the countryside itself is absolutely is stunning. It's jungle. It may look or would have looked very daunting for the poor souls who had to try to get their way out of the Flying Dutchman. But when we're well equipped today, it was obviously a lot easier, and with the support of the local people, it was a lot easier to do it. But it's still a tough war, and the countryside is it's the same as it was back in 1942. There are no villages, it's still hunting ground. The locals would like to make it a conservation area, so it's quite remote, and the only through way to get in there is to walk in.
So, since the crash in 1942, how many people have visited the range?
Well, shortly after 1942, I think it was in either 43 or 44, they did the first attempt at recovering bodies from the crash site. There are, and so that was, they managed to locate the site at that time, and they did an initial recovery. Then the next time it was visited was when they were actually searching for another plane that had crashed in 1961. And one of the patrol officers, a guy by the name of Jack Absalom, he led a party to where the pilot of the spotting plane had identified where the crash site was. And he led a party by quite a roundabout route out near Mount Brown and coming up around the northern side of Mount O'Brien, and they managed to find the site. And he subsequently wrote a report, and that's when the diary door was recovered from the crash site. And that diary door, which was a record kept by the survivors at the plane, records what they did. And what they did was, it rained today, we're dreaming of hamburgers, and of course, the recording when people died as they sat there waiting for help. And that diary door was recovered back to the Port Moresby Museum, and the original of the door has been sent to America and exists in the Air Force Museum in America, with a replica of the door now in the Port Moresby Museum. So that was in 1961. Then the next time, Bruce Hoy, who was the then curator of the PNG Museum and specialising in lost aircraft and assisting with the recovery of remains from World War II aircraft, was with the recovery team at a B-17 site up near Mount O'Brien. And he sent the local boys out to try to find Flying Dutchman in 1986. And they did find it. And he walked to it, and he discovered lots of things about the Flying Dutchman, including that there hadn't been a full recovery. And he reported that back to the recovery team. And so the recovery team went in again by helicopter in 1988 and camped on the site and did more recovery work in 1988. And that's the last time it's been visited, either by locals or outsiders like myself. The locals that I talked to say that some of them say they attempted at stages their parents attempted to take them up there, but it got so cold and wet they had to turn around. And so none of the current generation, including the older people, have ever been to the site.
Can you tell us about the Flying Dutchman itself and what happened at
The story of the Flying Dutchman? America entered the war in PNG at about the time that the Australians were fighting on Kokoda. And they thought that what they could do is get some of the American troops across the range to come in and cut the supply line of the Japanese to Kokoda. So they had an approach. Their approach was initially to send people over on what's called the Kappa Kappa, or the Ghost Mountain Trail, and they did send around about 1,000 troops on that. And that was a very tough march, of which only 25% at the end were still fit to fight at Buna, where the offensive was. They sent another lot around by barge, and that had limited success as well on the coast. Then they discovered, after they had sent these 1,000 troops off, that there were some airfields that they could make use of. And so for the first time ever in the war, they did a massive airlift of troops from Port Moresby to airstrips at Pongani, Able Airfield on the northern side in Oro Province. And so they were busy ferrying the companies from the same infantry regiment that walked. They were ferrying them across. And they were doing that in a C-47, which is, the commercial version is called the DC-3. And they had, in the Flying Dutchman, it took off just after midday on the 10th of November 1942.
The Flying Dutchman is a C-47.
The Flying Dutchman is a C-47. And they had 23 people on board, including the crew. They flew out, and they were actually on a bearing which was not direct to Pongani. It turns out that they were a little bit off a direct bearing, and that could have been deliberate because the pilot could have been avoiding any Japanese fighters that were around at the time, right, and therefore taking a little bit different route. No one knows, of course, why it was actually not on the direct route. They were up over around about the Mimai River Valley, approaching the top of the mountain range, and they experienced a sudden downdraft and they dropped. How much they dropped, I don't know, and none of the survivors know, but they dropped significantly. And of course, dropping just before you get close to the mountains is pretty dangerous. The pilot pulled it out as much as he could, but a C-47 isn't as responsive as a fighter, so it would have been very sluggish, particularly at that altitude, trying to pull out. They did pull out, and the survivors described clipping some trees, and they thought they had made it out after clipping these trees, and then they crashed straight into a little ridge on the side of Mount O'Brien at 2,800 metres above sea level. On impact, or on the way to impact, one wing was torn off, and the aircraft ploughed in to the hill, and the cockpit was buried in the side of the hill. What also happened is a fire broke out because the reserve fuel drums were just behind the cockpit, and all of the supplies, all of the packs and the gear that the troops in the back had would also have been stacked there. So there was a big fire that burnt all of their gear in the back, and they had to, when they crashed, the survivors had to exit the aircraft pretty quickly or they would have been burnt. They exited into rain and they moved away from the aircraft for some distance. Fortunately, for some reason, it didn't actually explode, it just burnt. And they had to wait a whole day for the fire to burn itself out and find their way back into the fuselage, which is still intact, the Flying Dutchman, to get some protection from the rain, some shelter. Then they, so 6 people died on impact of the 23. The next morning, another person died. The next day, they decided they'd better send out a party to try to get some help. And the first party of 4 headed out in a southwesterly direction towards Port Moresby. And when they hit the first creek, the creek was actually running to the north, so they followed the water. And they walked out to the north and they got into the headwaters of the Moni River, which is lead into the Musa River, which is a very big river in Oro. And they attempted to get out that way, 4 of them. At one stage, they decided to try to raft down the river to get logs and use the logs to help them float down the river. 2 of them disappeared, and they've never been seen again. Their mates tried to search for a day or two looking for these, and they couldn't find them. So they continued on, and eventually, with the help of local people that they came across, were assisted down the Moni River to Sofia. And at Sofia, there was an Australian Army dump of food. And so that was the first food they could get. And so they spent 2 or 3 days there recovering, eating food. Then they walked from Sofia across to Abao. So they walked back over the range to Abao. And they were pretty emancipated by then. And there was an Australian depot there, and they were able to be flown direct to hospital, military hospital in Port Moresby. About 3 days after the first group had departed from the Flying Dutchman, they decided to send a second group, the remaining 4 people who weren't too badly injured that they could still walk. And that group managed to find the compass from the cockpit. And they took the compass from the plane and kept on a southwesterly direction. And from their description, on the first night, it sounds like they camped on a cliff, which is a description which could put them on Mount O'Brien. So they almost went over the top of Mount O'Brien, which is a southwesterly direction from the plane. Then they continued on in that direction, and for at least a week, again with no food, right, without machetes to cut their way through the jungle. They just had to crawl through whichever way they could. And that group was led by Sergeant Ed Holloman, and he's written a story about this, quite detailed. It was over a week, I think it might have been around 10 days, before they came across some local people who helped them with food and some shelter for a while. And then they went on further and eventually got more help from local people, and eventually came out in Rigo district, probably around about Quikila, where they were met by some Australians because they'd sent a note down the line. And the Australian officer met them and helped them in. And of course, they also ended up in hospital. Then the first time the plane was discovered was, there was a search party was sent out after the first group got out and reported back. They were interviewed in hospital. And from the interview, they pieced together where they had come out. And some Australian and American soldiers walked from Sofia up the Moni River, all the way up its headwaters, round the back of Mount O'Brien, ran out of food, got very cold, short on supplies, and they got to within a very short distance of the crashed plane, but didn't manage to locate it before they had to turn back. And then it was local people a few days later, on around the 30th or the 31st of December, bearing in mind it crashed on the 10th of November, that those local people located the crash. There was one survivor, and that was the Padre, the chaplain, who was making the trip into the battle area on the C-47. And he was barely alive. And when they tried to feed him boiled bananas, he couldn't eat it, and he perished. And the locals took his diary where he had been, he took his Bible where he'd been keeping a diary back to show the Australians at Sofia. So they had knowledge then of what actually had transpired.
Can you tell us about your passion for the Flying Dutchman, your personal passion?
Well, I think it's a really important part of history, and I think the story should be told, and people should understand what has happened. And there are a few people in the past who've done that, and I think it's a story of survival, but also a reminder of what people went through, a reminder of how Australians, Americans, and local people were all working together at that time to do with the defence of Papua New Guinea. So I think it's a powerful story that needs to be told, and I guess I'm glad to be a part of it, almost by default, because my passion was about helping the communities, and that led to, I guess, a challenge of relocating the Flying Dutchman. And I do thank Bruce Hoy a lot, who spent a lot of time providing me with information and description that has helped me identify the area that we needed to search.
Can you tell us about what happened on that day? What exact day did you get into the crash site, and just tell us a bit about your personal emotions at finding the wreckage?
When we were searching for the site, it was on the 4th of October, Friday the 4th of October. We had walked from, in the drizzling rain, we'd walked from our camp on the edge of a high altitude grassland around into the search area that I had identified. And there were two possible directions we could have gone. So the team split up into two, one going more to the west and the other going to the east. And I went with the party going to the west, where we searched along the ridgeline for evidence of a helipad from 1988 and for the Flying Dutchman at about the altitude given the information. We continued searching along that, and about midday I got back to the camp because that was the direction of the camp. A very short time later, one of the locals came in very excited. They'd found the Flying Dutchman. The other team travelling in the other direction had found the Flying Dutchman. And then a little while later, the whole team came back and they were celebrating, and they were very confident that they found the Flying Dutchman, and it was a big celebration for them. And so I said, okay, I need to go and see it. And so we went back. It was about an hour and a half's walk through a reasonably tough track to the Flying Dutchman. And because I wasn't quite sure, because there are lots of crashes around, so I wasn't sure until I actually saw it that I was happy, very happy that it was the Flying Dutchman, and still very much intact, still very similar to the photos that Bruce Hoy took in 1988.
Okay, so what happens now?
I think there will definitely be a revival of the story, and what I'd like to do is offer the people who are interested the opportunity to engage with the local communities to help them go back. The local communities own that location. It's a potential by itself, it's not worth much, but by able to take people back and provide services and carriers and guides, accommodation, that's going to help them. And the extra traffic through might help get other goods and services that they need into those the most remote communities on the southern side of the range along the Captain Trail. So that's what I hope it will do, and I'll be working to try to make something of that happen.
Anything else you want to say?
I'd like to see, I guess, the story captured and told more. You yourself said you remember the story from a long time ago, and I suspect there are other people that may remember snippets of it,
those of us my age group, they would.
Yeah, and so I'd like to see that told and recorded, and I'd like that all of the local people will spend some time telling them the story, so that they knew the full story and the correct story about it too, right? So they can pass it on to their children and so forth and so on. So yeah, I'd like to see that happen as well, and get more interest, get at least some people there to see it and help those communities.
And this is a significant because the Flying Dutchman is part of Papua New Guinea's rich World War II history.
And I think it's also, I'm sure there are still relatives in the US of those troops who are on that Flying Dutchman and of the survivors, and it would be good for them to understand the full story too. It has all the makings of a movie. What happened, it's almost unbelievable that those people could actually survive that crash in the first instance, let alone get out. Because they ploughed into the side of that hill full pelt. And the fact that some survived, it's pretty amazing. And then to go through it again, 6 of them to actually get out, is quite incredible.